Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your indulgence. We're actually starting on time. This is a writer's block first, and parking is a nightmare, so we're leaving the lights dimmed for the first several minutes so people can come in and find their seats. So, I'm Andrea Grossman, the founder of Writer's Block. Thank you. Welcome to the launch of our 30th season. I'm so deeply honored to host Governor JB Pritzker in conversation with Billy Ray. So, before we get to tonight's program, here's my stern lecture on conduct. Some of you have heard this before. You all know that we're living in strange times, so I'm going to run through security issues. Writer's Block really does respect free speech, except not tonight. Because tonight, the floor belongs only to the two handsome guys who are going to be on this stage. You look like a nice and gentle crowd, not inclined to cause concern to our extensive security operation here. And we have Illinois State Police with us tonight as well. If we see any behavior that appears unsafe or distracts our speakers, this is a polite warning. We retain the right to remove offenders because outbursts will not be tolerated, except for like good outbursts, you know? The reason we're here tonight is that Governor Pritzker is one of the very few Democratic electeds who has broken through the noise. Governor Pritzker's opposition to Washington is fierce and effective. His consistent courage, commitment to justice, and to maintaining our democracy has caused many of you to call him heroic, and I certainly do. Billy Ray is an acclaimed screenwriter and director whose credits include The Hunger Games, Captain Phillips, The Comey Rule, and so many others. The reason why he's up here on stage with Governor Pritzker? Easy. Dems need messaging help, right? Especially now. He provides messaging guidance to 85 sitting members of the House and Senate, as well as 30 candidates running in the upcoming 2026 cycle. That's so many, I can't even do the math. So, when Governor Pritzker leaves the stage tonight, I ask that you stay in your seats to hear what Billy suggests to his sitting members of Congress and his 2026 candidates who come to him for help. Inspiration is a great good thing, especially now. I know you all want to take a photo of Governor Pritzker. You can do that when we bring him onto the stage right now. Stand up, cheer, take a picture or two, then sit down, turn your cell phones off, and ladies and gentlemen, Governor JB Pritzker and Billy Ray.
Thank you for coming, and to so many of you, thank you for coming back. JB Pritzker hails from a state that is singularly famous for its political corruption.
Not anymore.
Right.
Not anymore.
4 of Illinois' last 11 governors wound up in jail. Lovable crooks like Rod Blagojevich and George Ryan. Members of Congress, too. Noted bribe takers Dan Rostenkowski and Dennis Hastert. Chicago alone has sent 40 aldermen to jail. It is nuts out there. Enter JB Pritzker. Who took that zoo and made it work. Under Governor Pritzker's leadership, Illinois has enjoyed profound fiscal reform, criminal justice reform, huge expansions on education, healthcare, clean energy, voter access. He saved the state's pension. He raised the minimum wage. He attracted manufacturers in things like electric vehicles and quantum computing. He built bridges. He built schools. He built broadband. He banned assault weapons, and ghost guns, all without a whiff of scandal. In short, he maintained his integrity in an arena that makes integrity a handicap. So I guess my first question for you is, how did you do all that?
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. I'm not sure I've been introduced quite that way, as you know, your state's the most corrupt. Welcome. I will tell you just a quick funny story about that, because you reminded me when you said 4 of 11 of our governors of the last 11 governors went to prison, that when I first got elected in 2018, before I was sworn in, I had the opportunity to bring my family to the governor's mansion, which I had never done before. And I hadn't been, so I was also touring it for the first time. By the way, we have the largest governor's mansion in the entire country, and it's been renovated recently. My wife wrote a book. You should all go get that book. But I was there with my 14-year-old son. We were on the first floor, which is where the museum part of the mansion is, and my wife and my daughter were somewhere else. And there's a book that has the pictures of all the governors from 1818 all the way till today. And so I turned to the most recent page and I said to my son, Donnie, come over here. And I turned to the last page and I did this. There's a 40% chance I'll end up in prison at the end of this. I said, but if you take my collect calls, we can talk as long as you like. So I've been in office for 6.5 years now. So far, so good. No collect calls.
So I guess it was 91 or 92, the Democratic Party was in the wilderness. We had just seen 2 elections of Reagan and then one of George H.W. Bush. And here in LA, I heard about this new organization called DL21C, Democratic Leadership for the 21st Century. And it was being promoted and had been created by this guy I had never heard of named JB Pritzker, this guy from Illinois. And here you are today. Tell me where you think democratic leadership is right now, and specifically what happened to that organization.
Well, I'll just quickly tell you that there are a lot of people who were part of the organization back then, and it was around for 10, 15 years. In fact, still exists in some places today. But if you look around Illinois politics anyway, some of the young people who joined DL21C became our state leaders. Our current Senate president was an early member of Democratic Leadership for the 21st Century. Our comptroller, who then became my deputy governor, was a member of DL21C, and so on. So what we were trying to do back then was galvanize young people at a time when the Democratic Party really was falling off a cliff. And you remember George H.W. Bush was at about 90% in the polls in 1991 because of the first Gulf War and people's patriotic sense of, standing up with our president. But Democrats had no message. And so we really felt like there were issues that really mattered, like gun safety, like climate change, like reproductive rights. And so these were things that we gathered people around the issues. We felt like young people cared most about the issues, not about some political party. And I think it galvanized people to be engaged in politics in a way they hadn't been before. I will say today that is also true of young people. They are not animated by the Democratic Party or by some large organization nationally. They care deeply about climate change. They care deeply about gun safety, and we can go down that list, reproductive rights, and care deeply about the issues and not so much about the processes of government. And that, I think, is where we need to take a lesson from young people. I'm 60 years old now, and I can say that what animates people today to be Democrats is what we stand for, not that we have some label on us. And the idea that we are standing up for workers' rights, that we stand up for the most vulnerable people in our society, that we believe that the middle class and working class should be able to afford to buy a house, to be able to rent an apartment, to be able to live, that we ought to raise the minimum wage from $7.25, which is $14,000 a year, I might add, and that we are different than Republicans because we believe in affordability and standing up for people who just need a hand up. And so those are things I think young people are teaching the rest of us, right? Talk about the issues and focus on particularly affordability. And I've heard it over and over again. Young people can't afford to rent an apartment. They don't know how they're going to get a job that's going to pay enough for them to be able to raise a family, and can't afford to go to college. All the things that I think that maybe Democrats didn't work hard enough at, but now need to focus laser-like on. So I think that's the kind of the lesson of who we ought to be today and where the party stands today. Democratic leadership needs to be specifically about raising up the standard of living for everybody in this country.
I want to stay on home affordability for a second, just because we all come in contact with so many candidates from across the country, and they repeatedly tell us that that's the #1 issue in their race, is home affordability. In 1960, the average age of a first-time home buyer in America was 23. Today, it's 38. What kind of knock-on effect does that have on an economy? And what are you doing about it in Illinois? And what works?
So this is a problem all over the country, and some of it has to do with the current economic conditions. High interest rates are probably the #1 thing that's affecting whether we're developing new housing or not. That's not to say there isn't some blame to be had around policies that promote housing, but it is just to recognize that sometimes the economic condition is what holds down our ability to advance this cause, particularly housing. I also will tell you that on the issue of housing, just as governor and someone who's got a Democratic majority in our legislature, that the issue of housing sometimes gets shoved aside when you're trying to balance the budget of a state, because it's probably the most expensive thing that you can invest in. It may be the most impactful thing that you can invest in, but it's very expensive, right? If you want to help people buy a home, it means potentially $25,000 of benefit to people who are trying to put a down payment on a home, or trying to provide them with student loan relief in order to give them a benefit for buying a home. Those are things that just, when you're trying to balance a budget, and I remember my first year in office, just to talk about balancing budgets and this challenge, I went to my first National Governors Association meeting, and your governor, the governor of California, was there, and he and I sat down and met, and we really didn't know each other, and so I came in, sat down, I told him about the history, the challenges that we had with balancing the budget in Illinois. My Republican predecessor couldn't pass a budget, and we went 2 years without a budget and had a $17 billion bill backlog when I took office, and we had gone down 21 credit ratings in Illinois, and I mean, things were pretty bad from a fiscal perspective. And so I turned to him and said, how are things going in California? And he said, we have a $92 billion surplus. And I said, brother, can you spare a dime? And my point is that when you're challenged from a fiscal perspective, housing tends to fall by the wayside because there's so many other more immediate things that cost less that you can address. Meanwhile, there are long-term benefits, of course, of investing in housing, and some of that means using your state treasury, for example, to invest in people's ability to get housing. And not to give credit to a Republican state, but Utah, for example, used their state treasury to provide first-time home buyers who are buying a home of 2,000 square feet or less an enormous boost in their ability to buy that home, basically taking away their need for a down payment, providing them with some loan guarantee so they could afford it. And I think there are, and I'm a Democrat, but I just want to say, occasionally Republicans have good ideas. And I think we should be listening more for the good ideas. And I know it's a hard pill to swallow to even talk about bipartisanship these days, but I'm just saying we got to listen to one another a little more. So on the housing issue, we have used our Illinois Housing Development Authority to try to do all of these things in the face of the onslaught of high interest rates, because these are, all of us, some of us who are my age anyway, lived through very high interest rates in the early 80s, late 70s, although I was young at the time. But, we all kind of remember that can happen. And so these interest rates may not be that high, but they're a lot higher than they've been for quite some time. And so buying a house and borrowing money at 6.5%, 7.5% is just untenable for many people. So hopefully we can see interest rates coming down, and we'll see what happens. We shouldn't be pressuring the chair of the Federal Reserve, by the way, to just lower interest rates because Donald Trump thinks that we should. But I do believe that will help us an awful lot. And then meanwhile, we've got to have programs like we have in Illinois that are helping people with down payments and to pay their mortgage, rental assistance, and so on.
One more thing, just along those lines. The cost of electricity is now rising twice as fast as inflation. What's the appropriate role of a state government in that?
Oh, and I take this very seriously. First of all, I passed what's called the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act in Illinois in 2021. And essentially what it did was it's nearly tripled the amount of renewable energy that we're producing in Illinois. We are a state, I'm not sure how this audience feels about it, but we happen to have the most nuclear power of any state in the country. And it's been hugely beneficial as baseload for our state. 53% of all the electricity produced in Illinois comes from nuclear power. So we start with that when you think about trying to fight climate change, right? Adding renewables on top of that, we've now tripled renewables. It was 7.5% of our electricity in Illinois. It's now 20% of electricity in Illinois. And our Climate and Equitable Jobs Act forces us to get to 100% clean energy by 2045. And so we have a long way to go, but we are on the trajectory to get it right. What it means for us, though, is that we need to be open to building more nuclear, small modular nuclear, potentially large nuclear, and very importantly, we've got to grow the renewables portfolio across the state. And that, to me, is, it's not drill, baby, drill that's going to get us there. It's going to be renewables and the base load that comes from nuclear.
And I'm assuming none of your windmills have killed birds or caused cancer.
I can't vouch for any of that, but yeah, and we love birds and whales. We don't have too many whales in Lake Michigan, which I've now renamed like Lake Illinois. Gretchen Whitmer didn't like that all that much, but.
Okay, so now let's talk federal. In light of a corrupt and chaotic and criminal White House, what is the appropriate role of states in fighting back and providing resistance?
What's the appropriate role? I think I would say to everybody in this room and everybody in Illinois, as I have, every one of us has an important role to play, because it is now, everything is on the line now. Everything. Our democracy is on the line. And we all have an obligation. And what's the role that states can play in this? Well, first of all, leaders of states can stand up and speak out and make sure that people understand the danger that we now face. I do think people are, most people are just busy trying to get through the day. They've got a job, a family to raise, they got to pay the bills. There are so many challenges that they already faced before Donald Trump came back into office. And now they've got the challenge of democracy is being taken away. And that doesn't, on a day-to-day basis, when you're just trying to pay the bills, the idea that someone says to you, well, democracy is crumbling, feels like a tertiary issue to many people. Maybe not in this room, but I think, again, if you're just work a day and trying to get through the day and you can't afford to take a vacation, you can't afford most things that maybe our parents could afford, we have to remind people why the crumbling of democracy underneath that is going to make things that much worse. And we got to I have to say one very important aspect of this is we got to remind people what's really happening every day at the grocery store, when they go to buy an automobile, et cetera. I mean, $2,400 a year is what the tariff taxes are costing the American public. Donald Trump likes to say over and over again, foreigners are paying for it. No, everybody in this room and everybody in the country is paying for Donald Trump's tariff tax. It is literally like a national sales tax that he has put in place. And we have to remind people that, because I think that economic attack on families really is animating people. And then add on top of that you turn on your television set and you're seeing masked men taking people off the streets, tossing them into a car, taking them away. Their families don't know where they go, and they might end up at a gulag in El Salvador. And I think due process is, when explained and when people can see it on television, animates people. This is not the country that we grew up in. This is not the country we want to live in today.
The Democratic attorneys general in America, they want to form some sort of firewall. They talk 3 times a week. Do Democratic governors have regular calls with one another so that they can work in unison?
Yeah, let me just applaud the attorneys general, particularly the Democratic attorneys general. Yeah. And I know I'm in California, but I'm going to shout out the Attorney General of Illinois, Kwame Raoul, who's doing just an outstanding job. He and I got elected at the same time, and I cannot imagine what life would have been like in Illinois if we had had a Republican Attorney General during all these years, particularly during COVID, but now the new disease of Donald Trump. So I thank God for them. Yes, Democratic governors do talk to one another. By the way, we all started talking to one another really not because of the Democratic Governors Association, not because of the National Governors Association, but because of COVID. And we would call one another and talk about, what are you doing about school sports? How are you handling, can you let kids play football when they're sweating on each other? This is the middle of COVID. People are dying and getting sick. And I had a dashboard. I'll just remind all of you, probably every governor had something like this. But I woke up every morning. I get up very early, and I would turn on my iPad to this dashboard, and it would tell me how many people died the previous day, how many people got sick and went into the hospital the previous day. And it just, this was every single day throughout the COVID pandemic. And I say this because the same thing was happening in Michigan. The same thing was happening in Kentucky with Andy Beshear. The same thing was happening in California. The same thing was happening all over the country. And those of us who put lives ahead of livelihoods wanted to talk to one another. What are you doing to make sure you keep people alive and also keeping your economy going? But I chose, and many of us chose, to put lives ahead of livelihoods in the midst of the worst pandemic we've seen in 100 years. And so we talk to one another. That's my point, that the relationships are actually quite strong. And I'll just say in the Midwest that Tony Evers in Wisconsin, maybe you don't hear a lot about him, terrific. Just a terrific human being, and he's not a guy who grandstands or does podcasts or anything else. Now, that's not to say anything bad about podcasters. I just meant he doesn't seek the limelight all that much the way you would expect politicians do, and yet he's just a great human being. Tim Walz, Gretchen Whitmer, Andy Beshear. These are all the people around me, at least in the Midwest, Democrats that I would regularly talk to and say, how are you handling this problem? So we talk to one another all the time now because we're all facing the same things. We all are still in office. We're in our second terms. Some of them are termed out and won't be returning in 2026. I'm running for re-election because we don't have term limits. I've been saying all along, my wife is my term limit. And she's not here, so I'm running for re-election. No, she knows that. Anyway, so we are quite close, particularly the Democratic governors in the Midwest.
So the biggie for me is, are there good faith Republican governors? Are there Republican governors that you can call and say, this is an outrage, this is an attack on democracy, ICE is the most ridiculous thing we've ever seen? Are there any that with the cameras off can be truthful with you about that?
I have to hearken back to the middle of COVID because there were two governors, the governor of Maryland and the governor of Massachusetts, who were moderate Republicans, not Trumpers. And in the middle of COVID, I had regular conversations with them. And they weren't like ashamed to have talked to a Democratic governor. They represented Democratic states, in fact, but they were Republicans. I don't think there are any of those left. I mean, both of them are out of office. I really mean it. And I'm not suggesting that they're all bad people. I know some of the Republican governors. I've had good conversations when we run into each other, but they don't call me. They don't want. I mean, I'm happy to talk to any of them, even when we disagree. But, you know, they don't want people to know that they talk to Democratic governors because that's their party. I'm happy to tell anybody that I talk to Republican governors, and it's not like I agree with them on everything, but, you know, what is wrong with talking to people and listening to them? And like I said, occasionally they have good ideas that are worth, carrying out in your own state. But it's unfortunate. I think we live in a world where, at least in the Republican Party, you're going to incur Donald Trump's wrath if you express any solidarity or even friendship with Democratic governors. And they've stopped coming, most of them, to the National Governors Association, the Republicans, which happened, couple of years ago. And now Democratic governors are feeling like, the National Governors Association isn't doing the job that they need to do. So some of them have dropped out as well, which is sad because we need a place, all of us, to gather. Leaders of states, we have to accomplish things for people. We don't just vote on things and, well, if it didn't pass, hey, I voted for it and you should reelect me because I voted for that thing. We have to actually get these things done. And whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, housing, we got to deliver. Energy, we've got to deliver. And it doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat, everybody needs their, electricity in their home.
By the way, this is not a question. I just want to say, as you're talking, I find myself thinking, it is such a fucking privilege to be sitting up here with you. Thank you for what you do.
Thank you.
Is ICE a presence in your state and specifically in Chicago?
Yeah, you may remember, Billy, that before Trump was sworn in, for the several weeks before, a guy that I think most of us hadn't paid attention to before, named Tom Homan, started talking about the first place they were going to go with ICE was Chicago. And so, look, I knew that was going to happen, but I hadn't heard anybody articulate it. He actually came, remember, he was already going to be appointed to be the kind of immigration czar. And, you think people who serve, now you're going to serve in government. It's one thing to, you're running in an election, or your team is running in an election, and, you're fighting like, cats and dogs to beat the other side. They get elected. I got elected. And now you got to govern. And when you're in charge of a government, you represent all the people, even the people that didn't vote for you. Tom Homan, they already had won the election. Tom Homan came to Chicago, went to a Republican event, and announced that, I'm essentially public enemy number one, that Chicago is his first target. He hated the mayor of Chicago, and that, we're a place that's, harboring criminal immigrants. And so we knew that he was coming. We knew ICE was coming and that we were first. By the way, they showed up with Dr. Phil, I'm not exaggerating, with his cameras. And they were, you're smiling, but think of the idea that they're turning it into a reality TV show when we're talking about people's lives, we're talking about the peace being disrupted in communities across the city of Chicago. What we did to prepare was we made sure everybody knew what their rights were. We weren't telling people that you should break the law. We're just telling you what your constitutional rights are. And a whole lot of people, as a result, didn't get swept up by ICE when they showed up in Chicago. Now, I'm in favor, look, I want to be honest with all of you. If somebody commits a violent crime and they are undocumented in my state, they should be prosecuted in my state and they should go to prison in my state. And when they're done serving their prison time as an undocumented violent criminal, they should be deported. But not people who have spent 10 and 20 and 30 years holding down a job and abiding by the law and paying taxes and raising a family, and they're our neighbors and our friends. And so that's what's offensive about what they're doing right now. And oh, by the way, they're sweeping up, U.S. citizens and taking them away in the midst of all this. Masked men, who aren't identifying themselves. I helped to build a Holocaust museum in Illinois, the Illinois Holocaust Museum, and I led that effort. And I worked alongside Holocaust survivors. And one thing I can tell you is that it took 53 days for the Constitutional Republic of Germany to be torn down by the Nazis. 53 days, long before the Holocaust actually occurred. And people's rights were being taken away. People were being tagged as belonging to one ethnic group or one religious group. And I knew that masked men kidnapping people off the streets and taking them places their family didn't even know where they were going was too much a reminder of what authoritarians do when they take power. Here we are more than 53 days in, and it feels a whole lot like our constitutional republic is dangerously at risk.
Absolutely. One of the things that Tom Homan said was that he thinks racial profiling is sound policy. What is the legality of that? What does the law actually say about whether or not the United States government can racially profile as a means of determining who gets swept up and who does not?
Yeah, it's rare these days that they actually say the words that are unconstitutional. But guess what? It sometimes slips out, and particularly of the president's mouth. But that is what they're doing. And indeed, as they slowly take control of the court systems, it becomes harder and harder to fight back. And it's why I have said over and over when people want to know what should I do in the face of people's rights being taken away, the answer in a system where there is a Congress controlled by MAGA Republicans who pay fealty to their dear leader and will do whatever he says, and we Democrats are in the minority, that there is really only one thing that we can do, and that's to go out in the streets and protest, be loud, use your megaphone, your microphone, and for God's sake, show up at the ballot box and vote in 2026.
Seems an important moment to remind everybody that elections are run by states. and not by the federal government. I know a lot of people in this room are concerned that even as soon as 2026, that the election will be in some way rigged. What do you do to protect the legitimacy of voting in Illinois?
Well, first of all, we've expanded people's ability to vote. And as you have here in California, we have mail-in balloting, we have early voting. We protect people's right to get to the ballot box and vote. Yes, these are people who have the right to vote. They're citizens when they sign up to be a voter. We, check their ID when they sign up, and we hold free and fair elections. There's been very little. I know there's the history that people look at, 1960 maybe, in Chicago of saying that people are, showing up and who shouldn't vote, or dead people are voting, is what people used to say. But in Illinois, we actually, and every state, I might add, we control our elections. You control your elections here in this state. The federal government does not control how you operate your elections. You have a Secretary of State. I presume your Secretary of State runs your elections. Actually, in Illinois, ours does not. I like our system very well. It's actually operated at the county level. The clerks operate our elections in 102 counties across the state of Illinois, and that means it's unhackable. And that we have people actually checking, and making sure that we don't have fraud at every level, because we have, more specific looks at, who's voting and whether they're eligible to vote. And by the way, we have a completely fair, legal election system, and every person that's elected statewide in the state of Illinois is a Democrat. And we have supermajorities in the House and the Senate, and we did that all with free, fair elections.
Let's talk about the rural community in Illinois.
I'm sorry, can I just say one other thing? Yesterday, I think it was yesterday, that Donald Trump said that he's going to issue an executive order banning mail balloting, right? He does not have that power. There's no executive order that has any force that he can force the 50 states, which by the Constitution have power over how those elections take place. He has no ability to do this. So, he says a lot of things. Sometimes he oversteps. In this case, sometimes he says things that aren't true and then oversteps the law, he breaks the law. But in this case, really there's no ability that he has, unless he's going to, activate the U.S. Army, which I know you all have some experience with, to take over our states or state balloting. I just do not think that is something that will be tolerated by anybody. And it's a lot of bluster when he's talking about taking away mail-in balloting. It's because it incites his base. And he's hoping that they'll get armies of people to try and deter people from sending in mail-in ballots in Illinois.
And by the way, when you talk about federalizing the police force of a city, he's not going to do that in cities that have huge murder rates like St. Louis or Memphis, because those are Republican states. He's only going to pick on you.
That's right. And maybe all of you know that, 8 of the top 10 cities, in fact, I think the top 8 of the top 10 cities for violent crime are red cities in red states. But he's not doing anything in those cities, right? He likes to talk about Chicago. I just pointed out about the state of Illinois that we're actually 31st out of 50 states in terms of violent crime, 31st. So, or 19th best is another way to say that. And as I like to say. But, he likes to bluster about these things. And what I love is that whenever I push back, I seem to live rent-free in his head. And so I kind of like it when he decides he's going to talk about me, and he calls me the worst governor in America, and he calls me, you know why that is? It's because he knows we actually are carrying out in a very positive way, Democratic policies in Illinois, and they're successful. And he wants, nevertheless, to denigrate somebody that he knows is successful. So that's how I take it. That is what he's been doing. And maybe also because since I started running for governor in 2017, the first line of every speech I gave when I ran was, everything we care about is under siege by a racist, misogynist, homophobic, xenophobic president in Washington, D.C. I guess he didn't like that.
You know, the thing about Trump is he can take a beating, but he can't take a punch.
That's exactly
He really doesn't care if half America hates him, but if one person insults him, he cannot get past it. And you're that person.
One of them. One of them.
Let's talk about...
Your governor's doing a pretty good job.
Yes. Let's talk about the farmers in Illinois. In America, in the first 3 months of 2025, there were more farm bankruptcies than there were in all of 2024. We also know that the rate of suicide among farmers is 3.5 times the general population. What can be done to help farmers? How much are tariffs impacting farmers negatively? What is the appropriate role of a state in trying to help that industry? Clearly, you have spoken to farmers and they are voting for you, as is evidenced by your success electorally. What is it that you say to them that other governors are missing?
Rural agricultural areas. By the way, my state, 75% of my state is agricultural. Just land mass. 75% of the state is mostly corn, soybeans, wheat. It's one of our 2 largest industries. So vitally important. And by the way, we're also #1 in soybeans, #2 in corn production in Illinois. I guess I'll throw in that we're #1 pumpkin producer in the country. And we make, I think, 75% of all the horseradish. So just wanted to throw that in for the horseradish lovers out there. But I mention this because, so Illinois is an agricultural state as much as anything. And in rural areas, as you point out, we have an enormous problem with mental health challenges. It's also happening in every other place. But particularly in those areas, very hard, has been historically very hard for people to access therapy, psychologists, mental health help. And so we created a program precisely to focus on the rural farmers and their families, because it's a rampant problem. That's one hugely important thing. You talk about the tariffs. You can imagine how mental health is affected by the downturn in your industry if you're a farmer. And in Illinois, because we are #1 in soybeans and #2 in corn, we sell a lot overseas, or at least historically have. That got knocked down in 2017 and 2018 at the beginning of Trump's last term because of tariffs. And the Japanese, the Chinese, the countries all over the world that were buying our corn as feed and so on, not to mention soybeans for Asia, because of the tariffs, guess what? Those Asian countries decided, well, we're going to go to Brazil and buy most of our soybeans there. So we got knocked down. We had been #1 in the world in the United States. We got knocked down to #2. Brazil all of a sudden became our big major competitor and became #1. Started to climb the waterfall again after Trump left office during Biden's term. And Trump came back into office and the tariffs came back in, and guess what? Brazil is kicking our butts again. And I say this because rural areas of this country that voted for Donald Trump for the most part are now having visited upon them all the negative effects of having a president who is not interested in serving not only the people that elected him, but also most broadly people that really matter across the country, the people that make this country great. And he's actually working against their very interests. So I do think that you're starting to see in those areas, and I'm hearing it. You know, I've had a lot of hearings, meetings across the rural areas of my state. Farmers are a little bit unwilling to blame Donald Trump directly, but they will talk about tariffs. They will talk about the things that he's doing. They just haven't quite gotten to the point where they're naming him, partly because I think they don't want to offend their neighbors. They're not sure that, you know, that's going to be accepted in their communities, which are very Republican. But people are upset, very upset, and some of them are showing up for some of the protests that we're seeing in the streets. And you should be cheering that on. Sorry, one thing about this, there's a woman who, I like to tell this story because she's kind of an amazing lady who showed up in Edwardsville, Illinois. 28,000 people live in Edwardsville. And about a month into Trump's term, she just couldn't take it anymore, couldn't imagine, you know, that people weren't already outraged by what he was doing just a month into office. So, and she lives in this semi-rural area of the state. So she made a handmade sign, and she went and stood at the crossroads of two highways, state highways, and held the sign up by herself, hoping that people would, pay attention. And someone happened by and said, "What are you doing?" And she explained, "I'm outraged by what Donald Trump is doing to our communities." And so they stood there with her for the rest of the time. And then she came back the next day, and 4 of her friends showed up. And then she came back the next day, and there were about 12 people that showed up. And now, every Friday in Edwardsville, at this same location, 300 people show up to protest. So if it can happen in rural Illinois, it can happen anywhere. And we're seeing, the No Kings protest happened in those areas, just like it did in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, in Chicago, and elsewhere.
It's an obsession of mine, and I know for many of us, to grow the tent of the Democratic Party.
Yes.
Certainly, rural voters are part of that. Is there a specific way to talk to rural voters that can give them a permission structure, an off-ramp to leave the Republican Party, even just for one election, and give Democrats a chance?
I don't want us to forget that people who live in rural areas have many of the same concerns that people who live in suburban areas and urban areas have. They don't like it that people are being kidnapped off the streets and disappeared. They don't. They don't like, they don't like the idea of undocumented criminals, and they like some of the other things that Donald Trump might be doing, but they also are hyper skeptical now because their economy is being ill-affected, and they're seeing that due process rights are being taken away even from people who are legally in this country, including U.S. citizens. And so I just, not forgetting that when you say, well, how do we get them to start to move our direction? The answer is they are moving our direction. I think that Donald Trump is a hyper unusual example of, and will go away, by the way. He's not running in 2028. He's not. He's going to go away, but we are going to have to live with him for 3.5 more years. And so the question is, can we slow him down or stop him as an authoritarian? And that's working. Those people that you're talking about and people who live in rural areas are waking up to the idea that something is really wrong. And so I think we need to speak to them not by hammering on Donald Trump specifically, but talking about the policies of MAGA Republicans, the big ugly bill, the tariffs that are being put on them, and reminding them that we Democrats, that we're actually the ones that are doing our best to save Medicaid, stand up for Medicare, Social Security, voting rights, civil rights.
In the wake of the big ugly bill, how many rural hospitals are in jeopardy of closing in your state?
So in Illinois, we have probably 9 hospitals that are on the chopping block if those Medicaid cuts, when those Medicaid cuts go into effect. Not to mention a whole bunch of other providers, not just the hospitals, but providers. And this is the sad part. You know, the Republicans who represent some of these areas, they voted for the big ugly bill, and yet a large portion of people who live in their districts are on Medicaid. And they won't admit that what they've done is take health care away from their very own constituents. And so we've been trying to highlight this fact. Veteran services have been decimated, and the Veterans Committee chairman, is the southernmost district in Illinois. A guy named Mike Bost, and he voted for the big ugly bill. He was, cheering on DOGE, and yet it's the people who live in his area and the things he cares about most that are being decimated. So it's a real, it's a real problem. I think Democrats are going to, we have to be very loud about what is happening, because I think it's happening so slowly. It's like the frog, in the boiling water. It's happening so slowly that people haven't quite realized, again, because they're working hard every day and taking care of their families, they haven't realized that health care is about to be taken away from them. And the Republicans have been scheming to do this by essentially making sure that it doesn't go into effect until right after the next election, the 26th election. We've got to remind them what's going to happen to them.
Right now, whether Trump fires the statistician from the BLS or not, 69% of independent voters say that their income does not match their expenses. 64% of Republicans say the same thing. Their income is not matching their expenses. How long before that actually becomes a drag on, forgetting Trump in 28, but individual Republicans running for the Senate and House in 26? Are they going to be able to run on MAGA if their own constituents can't meet their expenses?
If we don't do our jobs, the answer is yes, they're going to be able to run on it and win. What I'm saying is, look, you all look at the polls maybe sometimes on television, and what you can see is that the generic congressional poll, which asks, if the election were held today, would you vote for the Democrat or the Republican, not names. It's very rarely a number more than 1% or 2% one way or the other. It's now +7 Democratic. But that does not, that's for 2026. That does not mean, though, that Democrats are going to win in 2026. And why do I say that? Because we can't rest while things are happening and they're stealing seats in Texas, and they're attempting, to take away people's voting rights. We can't rest, even though we would win the election. And this is why they're going after those seats, because Donald Trump knows that he's going to lose Congress in 2026. That's why he's trying to steal seats around the country, and that's why we've got to stand up against it. It's why I'm hoping that the gambit that California is taking right now my hope is, because one of the strategies is, okay, if you're going to take 5 seats away or 7 seats away in that state, here we've got California that could take 5 or 7 seats away. And if you try to do that, Missouri tries to, take a seat away, then maybe Maryland should go try to take a seat away. And that the idea is that maybe Republicans will wake up, at least in those states, and say, we need to stop this, because it does not, the logical end is pretty terrible for the country. And that doesn't seem to bother Greg Abbott, for example, but I do think that that's something that we're going to, we have to reckon with. There are no rules anymore, apparently, because Republicans have taken the rule book and tossed it out, and we Democrats can't live by some set of rules that's no longer in place. We can win, though. We can win, and we will win if, you know, if everybody in this room and a whole bunch of other people and leaders in the Democratic Party speak up, speak out. Again, we've got to make sure that we're loud about this for the next year.
In 2016, there were 6.2 million Americans who had voted for Obama, who then voted for Trump, flip voters. 1.3 million of them were in 3 states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, which is why the blue wall crumbled. So someone far smarter than I am did a deep dive on who are those people in those 3 states. Why would they flip from Obama voters to Trump voters? And what they found out was that that voter on average works 2.5 jobs, commutes 3 hours per day, and thinks about politics 4 minutes per week. Per week. I can't recall the last time I went 4 minutes without thinking about politics. How do you reach voters who are thinking about politics 4 minutes per week, if that?
Because when you think about it, it's not politics to somebody about whether or not they have health care. It's not politics to them about whether or not they're earning a living that pays their, you know, their expenses. It's not politics when, you know, your local public school isn't funded well enough. This is like your life. And again, we, people who, and you and all of you, when we talk about this, it can't be about politics as much as it is about affordability and a way of life and a standard of living. These are things that matter in people's lives. It's not the, you know, it's not the politics of it, it's the livability. So to me, boiling it down, you're the message expert. So I should leave this to you. But to me, the subject matter around affordability, which is not just about prices and inflation, but also about earnings, about whether or not we think it's okay to join a union and that we're going to help people stand up for their workers' rights, right? In Illinois, by the way, we passed a workers' rights amendment, the first state in the country to do so, guaranteeing your right to collectively organize. But add on top of that, we should be raising the minimum wage, right? $7.25 is not nearly enough. And we need to be talking about affordability, you know, again, about housing, about education, about healthcare. Look, I'm a Democrat because I think everybody in this country should have healthcare. Everybody. And we should have good public education available to everybody. And we shouldn't be privatizing it. And I'll add on top of that like, you know, one of the most fundamental things about at least my perspective about being a Democrat is we're the party of civil rights. And what that means is that when small minorities of people are being discriminated against, and Republicans are very good at picking on the smallest of minorities, that, yeah, you know what? The party of civil rights, we should stand up for them just like we have for civil rights for, I don't know, 50 years. And so I mentioned it just, you know, we are a, you know, we cannot lose sight of the fact that it is really challenging for people to make a living and survive and thrive in this country. And if we do not focus on what's best for working families, the middle class, and the most vulnerable, which is where government ought to be about, instead of taking health care away and education away so that we can give massive tax cuts to the wealthiest people in the country, that I think that we will win if we stand on principle, standing up for what I think are the things that really matter in people's lives.
So this is one where I'm going to tell you to pretend that there are no cameras and nobody's recording this.
So just between you and me.
Just between you and me. What is the knock-on effect of the big, beautiful bill? All of those tax cuts to the super rich, another $3.4 trillion in debt added to the United States economy. How bad can it get? Is there some massive recession coming if it hasn't already begun? Just between us.
Just between us. I can say this, that one of the things that they're doing to the economy that I don't think that Donald Trump understands. I mean, he's a real estate developer, and real estate developers, very successful, that's great. I don't think he understands business, and I don't think he understands the economy. And I will say that Donald Trump is trashing our futures in a way that is not being recognized yet. And that is, we are the world's reserve currency, the dollar is. And it has benefited Americans that we have been the world's reserve currency really since World War II. That people base their economies and their currencies on ours. And when we are no longer trusted by countries across the world to make rational decisions, in particular, how we deal with them, think about our relationship with Canada. I don't know about here in California, but in Illinois, our number one trading partner is Canada. And I have spent time in Canada. I must say, Canadians and Americans live very much like one another and believe in very much individually in the same things. And when we attack our neighbors like Canada, like Mexico, when we attack our allies like in Europe, and we don't stand up for our allies like Ukraine, people begin to wonder if the United States is actually the country that they should be relying upon for their own futures. So think about how that undercuts everything, the economy especially, but everything else too, peace in the world, when we're no longer viewed as a reliable human rights advocate and strong ally for people to rely upon. That is probably the most challenging thing that Donald Trump is doing to this country, undermining underneath, the foundations of this country. And by the time he leaves, unless we stop him in 2026, by the time he leaves, it may be extraordinarily difficult to rebuild after he is gone.
So we have 1 minute left, because you have places to be, but I want to give you the last word until I then go oraculate for 7 minutes. What gives you hope? It's so easy to be discouraged. What gives you hope every day?
Thank you for asking that, and I'll just say to all of you, I was motivated to go into public service really by at least two things that I think about a lot. I think I lost my father when I was 7 years old. He was 39. I lost my mother when she was 49 and I was 17. And my mother is really my hero. She's somebody who was an activist for LGBTQ rights and for reproductive rights in the 60s and 70s when it was hard to do. And when it wasn't really a popular thing to go out and advocate for back then. But she did it anyway. And by the way, she was a widow who had 3 children, and she was an alcoholic. And she struggled with her alcoholism until her death, which really was caused by her alcoholism. I mention that because so much of what she was about was overcoming the challenges that people go through. And yeah, we had resources, but when you have a disease like alcoholism, it isn't like your resources can overcome the disease. It helps to help you survive for maybe longer, but ultimately it killed her. I mention that because what she stood for, right, was taking up a cause that wasn't easy and that might have been a minority position at the time, but she did it because she knew she was right. And by the way, we lots of progress made. She would be enormously disappointed now, of course, by Dobbs, but lots of progress made standing up for LGBTQ rights and reproductive rights in this country. And so just, side note, I think she would be disappointed, but also see that lots of progress was made as a result of the work that she did. The other thing that motivated me to, and this is getting to hope, the other thing that motivated me to get into public services, when I was in college, the president of my university was about 70 years old, and he had been 25 years earlier, he had been the youngest governor elected in North Carolina history in 1960. And he was the first Southern governor to integrate the schools. This is at the time when George Wallace was standing in the schoolhouse doorway and standing up for segregation. The governor of North Carolina was opening the schoolhouse doors for black and brown people. He knew when he did it that he couldn't have been elected dog catcher when he was done. He knew he was sacrificing his entire career, but he also knew that he was doing the right thing, and he did it because of that. And it happened 25 years later. I was a student. I was called up. I went to Duke, and I was called up to volunteer when he was announcing his candidacy. He wanted a lot of students around him. He was 70 years old. He wanted a lot of 18 and 20-year-olds around him. And they asked me if I would organize a bunch of students. So I did. And then after I did that, they hired me onto the campaign as an advance man. I mention this because I traveled the entire state of North Carolina with him during the campaign. And it was a formative experience. Why? This is a guy who had done the right thing 25 years earlier and became very unpopular as a result of it. The Republicans in the mid-1980s were throwing invectives at him for having done that, for having integrated the schools back in the early 60s. Still, right, in the 80s, they're doing this to him. And he stood up proudly and said, look, I did the right thing. I'd do it again. And he's somebody who overcame, he won the election, and he overcame what the Republicans were trying to do to him. And most importantly, he overcame the racism that was, brought upon him for having integrated the schools. I tell you those two stories because I have hope that we can win, even, even in the face of all these terrible things that Donald Trump is doing today. That the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. That's what Martin Luther King told us. And that part about it being long is true because it doesn't go up in a straight line. Sometimes we go backward. We take steps back. Sometimes it's 2 steps forward and 2 steps back, or 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But overall, we move in the right direction, more rights. We believe in that, all of us, I think, standing up for more freedoms, reproductive rights, standing up for, your ability to go to a parade in Highland Park, Illinois, and not get shot at by somebody with an assault weapon. We passed that ban on assault weapons, and we are making progress in this country, even if today it feels hard and terrible. But all of us have an obligation to do, I think, what my mother was doing, what Terry Sanford, the governor of North Carolina, who became a senator from North Carolina, did, which is, even in these hard moments, stand up, do the right thing, we will overcome.
I think I speak for all of us. You give me hope. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'll be brief, I promise. He's a hard act to follow. There are so many lies in our politics, but among all of them, the biggest is that we are a divided nation. We're not. and it's not particularly close. When minimum wage was put on the ballot in Florida recently, it got 60%. In Arkansas, it got 62%. In Missouri, it got 67%. These are states where Democrats routinely get stomped. And yet this core Democratic idea was hugely popular. Why? Americans overwhelmingly agree with us on a woman's right to choose. They agree with us on guns. You know, if you stop using the term universal background checks, which everybody hates, and start using the term violent history checks, 95% of the country comes with you, including 73% of NRA members. Americans are with us on protecting Social Security and on Medicaid. They love it when we take on Big Pharma. They loved it when we reduced the costs of insulin. They're with us on climate change. They know that only we are capable of climate reform. They loved Biden's infrastructure bill. In short, they agree with us on just about everything. So why don't we win more elections? I think it's because we have allowed our party to be defined by our opposition to one man, which means that people know what we're against, but they don't know what we're for. I never got applause during a political speech before. Thank you. Last year, we spent $6.7 billion on an election cycle, and yet if you stop any American in the middle of the street and say, what does the Democratic Party stand for? He cannot tell you. If pressed, he'd say, well, I know you hate Trump, and you love abortion, and you love transgender people, and you love open borders. That's our brand. Hardly the new frontier. And it cost us dearly in 2024. We lost the popular vote and all 7 swing states to a guy who was selling Bibles and sneakers during the election because we tried to sell joy to people who couldn't afford eggs. We told them how to talk. We insisted that they celebrate things that they've just learned how to tolerate. Never has a party been so willfully deaf. We told people they were weird and demanded their support in the same sentence. Consider this for a second. 68% of this country is Christian. 88% of the homes in this country have a Bible. The average has 4. In the Democratic Party's 2024 platform, there are mentions of Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, and Islam. Do you know how many mentions of Christianity there are? 0. Not 1. That's not just political suicide. It's discriminatory. As someone who's not Christian, I find it appalling. Think about these numbers. In a recent poll, Americans were asked, what percentage of our country do you think is transgender? Americans said 21%. The answer is less than 1. They were asked, what percentage of this country do you think is Jewish? Americans said 30%. I can tell you from personal experience, the answer is less than 2. Americans think 41% of this country is black. The actual number is 12. Clearly, Americans do not know, demographically, what country they're living in. And white Christians, now believing that they are suddenly the minority, have backed into tribal corners and come out swinging, and the result is MAGA. And here's the Democratic Party reinforcing that lie by telling 68% of the country, you don't matter. Worse, that you're the problem. We placed fear over faith, and it made our tent smaller. That has to stop immediately, right now. Because we have a moral obligation to win now. I'm not interested in any candidates who run a great race and come close. What is on the line is democracy and liberty themselves, the future of the American experiment. It can end right now on our watch if we don't expand our tent and run people who can actually win. So no, we can no longer keep using terminology, cotton candy phrases that sound like they were dreamed up in the Harvard faculty lounge. If people want to say criminal, they can say criminal. They don't have to say justice-involved individual. That's insane. No, we cannot make them say unhoused instead of homeless. And the governor of Wisconsin, who is a great guy, recently said, I quote, I'm not going to use the term mom anymore. I'm going to say inseminated person. I'm glad he's fucking retiring. If we are to champion diversity, if that's the hill we're going to die on, we must also embrace diversity of thought. Hello? Our tent must grow. The future of democracy depends on it, which means we have to start thinking about saying these 6 things out loud. 6 truths I'm about to give you, incontrovertibly true, that no Democrat will say, because it might offend the 23-year-old Wesleyan grad on their staff. But think about these and think about what saying them would do to the size of our tent. Ready? I'm about to offend you all. Wanting secure borders does not make you a racist. No, it doesn't. You can wait till the end. Owning a gun does not make you a school shooter. Disagreeing with us on a woman's right to choose does not make you a fascist. We need those people in our party. Being uncertain about vaccines does not make you a flat earther. Maleness is not inherently toxic. We got to drop that one. And being a Christian is not the same thing as being a white nationalist. If we can say those 6 things out loud, our tent will get bigger, because the votes are now where the votes have always been, in the big middle. And the people in the big middle need to know that we don't have disdain for them. That's what we've been communicating for 20 years. They need to know what our core beliefs are. I think these are our core beliefs, that government exists to provide the big stuff: justice, opportunity, fairness, national security, border security, economic security, in some cases food security, so that Americans are free to live their best lives. That our party exists to bring more people into the middle class, period. Their health, safety, and well-being are our mission. That small businesses need more help than big businesses do. That labor in America must be protected from unrestrained corporate greed and a tax code that serves only the uber wealthy. That our greatness comes from our goodness. That our Constitution is inviolable, that freedom is the ultimate American value, and that democracy is the way we protect it. That every American matters, and no American matters more than any other. This is our brand: liberty, justice, opportunity, fairness. We will get a lot farther running on that than by telling 68% of the country that they're the problem. And we must, because the alternative is the end of American liberty forever. So do we want to lead this country, or do we just want to lecture it? In Omaha in 1957, 3 years before he became president of the United States, JFK perfectly summed up our party. He said, "As long as there is one child in an overcrowded or unsafe school, or one farmer forced to leave his farm, as long as there is blight in our cities, people without decent shelter, as long as these things exist, so long is the need for the Democratic Party. This is our responsibility and our trust. We in the Democratic Party can build the schools, the homes, and the hospitals that our nation needs. We can fight against poverty, illness, injustice, and economic insecurity. We can build a lasting peace. If, in short, we remain close to the people will remain close to us." Did you hear anything in there about pronouns or microaggressions or being triggered? No. Yes, we are in a moment of crisis. We will get one another through it by putting faith over fear. When you fight against a corrupt and chaotic and criminal White House at the risk of arrest, you are putting faith over fear. When you stand up and go to bat for vets, the elderly, kids, everyone left behind by Mike Johnson and his spectacularly dishonest caucus, you are putting faith over fear. When you challenge your own party to be its best self, to reject its lunatic fringe, you are putting faith over fear. And when you come to a place like this and sit through events like this, you are putting faith over fear, and I want to thank you all for that. Every Democrat that I talked to lately has an escape plan for if things get really bad. Vancouver, Spain, New Zealand, any of these sound familiar? Republicans don't do that. During the Biden years, they did not flee this country. They wrote Project 2025. It is now upon us to write Project 2026. And Project 2028, and Project 2030, and Project 2032. A great sage once said to me, pick a prayer and then pray it. America is that prayer for all of us. No, we are not abandoning this country. We are standing here and we are fighting, and we are going to save it for our children. Donald Trump is now polling at 38%. He is underwater for the first time in either of his terms on the economy and on immigration. No, we are not a divided country. We are just a deeply misled one. We will escape this darkness by leaning on each other and our first principles. They are, again, faith over fear, community, truth. That starts tonight, right now. With minimum rage and maximum commitment, our work is not done until there is liberty and justice for all. That is our responsibility and our trust, as JFK said. Thank you for coming. Good night, and I will see you in the trenches.